1840. Not an era, not a vague stretch of history, a single year. Hold it in your mind, because everything in this story begins there. Within months of each other, 3 separate expeditions set sail toward the most hostile place on Earth. An American squadron led by Charles Wilkes, a French expedition under Jules Dumont d'Urville, and a British mission commanded by James Clark Ross. 3 nations, 3 rival powers, no coordination, no shared objective beyond exploration. And yet, they all went to the same place at the same time: Antarctica. At first glance, it fits perfectly into what we call the Age of Exploration, a time when the edges of the map were still being filled in. But the deeper you look, the less comfortable that explanation becomes. Because buried in private journals, in redacted reports, in fragments of letters never meant for publication, there are details that don't quite fit. Details that suggest these men may have seen something they didn't fully understand, and perhaps something they were never meant to describe. Welcome to Biography Plus. This is not a story about conspiracy. It's a story about the thin line between discovery and interpretation, about how extreme environments can distort perception, and how history is shaped not just by what is found, but by what is believed. Charles Wilkes left the United States in 1838 with 6 ships and nearly 350 men. His mission was scientific, ambitious, and dangerous. When he returned years later, he claimed to have charted over 1,500 miles of Antarctic coastline. But his own officers challenged him. Not because he exaggerated, because they believed he left things out. Private letters from crew members described disagreements over what they had seen: strange formations along exposed rock, features that did not match the official charts. Wilkes himself faced court-martial later in his career, and while not directly tied to Antarctica, his reputation became complicated, his work questioned, his findings quietly debated rather than celebrated.
Around the same time, the French explorer Jules Dumont d'Urville reached what he named Adélie Land. His reports were polished, structured, and widely accepted. He was celebrated as a national hero. Then, 2 years later, he died in a train accident outside Paris. The tragedy was real, sudden, and devastating. Among the things reportedly lost were personal materials from his travels. It's important to be careful here. Accidents happen. Loss does not equal concealment. But in historical research, patterns matter. And then there was James Clark Ross. Perhaps the most methodical of the 3, Ross approached Antarctica with scientific discipline. He encountered the massive ice barrier now known as the Ross Ice Shelf, a wall of frozen white stretching farther than the eye could see. His official reports are calm, precise, almost restrained. But the private logs tell a slightly different story. Officers recorded observations of unusual rock exposures where wind had stripped the ice away. Descriptions of sharp angles, repeated forms, surfaces that looked structured. Not artificial, but unfamiliar. And that distinction matters, because Antarctica is not just ice. Beneath the frozen surface lies a continent of mountains, valleys, and ancient geology. In certain places, known as nunataks, rock emerges through the ice. To a 19th century sailor, seeing those formations for the first time would have been deeply unsettling. Volcanic basalt can form columns with near-perfect symmetry. Erosion can create flat plains and angular fractures. Under harsh light, with shadows stretching across white emptiness, natural formations can appear almost architectural. Modern geologists understand this, but these explorers did not. Now fast forward several decades. A later expedition, led by Karsten Borchgrevink, became one of the first to overwinter on the Antarctic continent. Months of darkness, isolation, extreme cold. Conditions that test the limits of human psychology.
Crew members recorded what was then called polar madness. Hallucinations, disorientation, visual distortions caused by light reflecting across ice and atmosphere. There is a known phenomenon called a fata morgana, a complex mirage where distant objects appear stretched, elevated, or transformed into shapes resembling towers, walls, even entire cities. To someone already exhausted, isolated, and surrounded by an alien landscape, those illusions can feel completely real. Some crew members described seeing patterns beneath the ice, shapes, structures, not because they were there in a literal sense, but because the human brain is designed to find patterns, even where none exist. And in Antarctica, the environment amplifies that instinct to an extraordinary degree. The silence, the scale, the endless horizon, it creates a kind of psychological pressure. Now, let's address another layer of the mystery: old maps. Maps created long before Antarctica was officially explored. Some, like the Piri Reis map, appear to show land masses resembling the Antarctic coastline. This has led to speculation that ancient civilizations somehow mapped the continent before it was covered in ice. But when these maps are studied closely, the explanation becomes less mysterious and more complex. Cartographers of the past often combined known geography with speculation. They filled gaps with educated guesses, sometimes based on distorted reports or incomplete data. What looks like Antarctica may actually be a misinterpreted extension of South America, or simply an attempt to complete the map where knowledge was missing. History is full of these approximations, not deception, not lost technology, just the human attempt to understand a world that was still largely unknown. And that brings us back to the core question: why do these stories feel so convincing? Because they touch on something deeper than facts. They challenge the idea that we fully understand our past. They suggest that something might have been missed. And in a world where new discoveries are constantly reshaping what we know, that idea is powerful. But power does not equal truth. What we do know is this: the expeditions of the 19th century were real. The dangers were real. The psychological strain was real. The environments they entered were unlike anything they had ever experienced. And in those conditions, perception becomes unreliable. Light bends. Distance distorts. Shadows deceive. The brain fills in gaps. What feels like certainty can become illusion. And yet, even knowing all of this, the mystery doesn't completely disappear. Because history is not just a record of events. It is a record of human experience, of what people believed they saw, of how they tried to describe the indescribable. Some questions remain unanswered, not because they are hidden, but because they exist at the edge of interpretation. Standing at that edge, it is easy to imagine something more, something larger, something buried beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. But sometimes the truth is not hidden beneath the ice. Sometimes it exists in the way we interpret what we see. The Antarctic expeditions of the 1800s did not uncover lost cities. They uncovered something equally profound: the limits of human perception, the power of environment to reshape reality, and the way mystery is born not from what is there, but from how we try to understand it. And here on Biography Plus, that is where the real story begins.